fight. Today, a deep dive to find out where is all this bad press coming from? Who's behind it? There are at least a half dozen entities in the mix right now trying to gin up opposition to Hagel before Thursday's confirmation hearing begins. One of the groups that got involved early is the Emergency Committee for Israel. It's run by the Weekly Standard's Bill Kristol and former presidential candidate Gary Bauer. The group has spent much of the last 2 years going after candidates it says are anti-Israel. It's been running ads against Hagel for more than a month.
President Obama. For Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel is not a responsible option.
Billionaire Sheldon Adelson has also been linked to anti-Hagel efforts, both through donations to the Republican Jewish Coalition and reportedly through direct outreach to Hagel's Republican critics in the Senate. Washington Free Beacon has also been accused of running anti-Hagel articles online. For example, last Friday's article described Hagel as a, quote, deeply embedded with a network of pro-Iran foreign policy groups that have lobbied to lift economic sanctions and boost U.S. engagement with Tehran. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn offered a similar line of attack when he criticized Hagel's nomination on Monday.
I cannot support a nominee for defense secretary who thinks we should be tougher on Israel and more lenient on Iran.
The group Americans for a Strong Defense didn't exist until this month, when it was set up apparently for the sole purpose of opposing Chuck Hagel. Led by former RNC Communications Director Danny Diaz and former Romney advisor Brian Hook, the group is running ads urging Democratic senators to vote no.
Barack Obama's nominee for Secretary of Defense wants America to back down. An end to our nuclear program, devastating defense cuts, a weaker country.
Another group, American Future Fund, has ads questioning Hagel's ethics, calling on the Senate to postpone the hearing. Finally, a group that purports to be coming from the left, supported by members of the gay and lesbian community, the group Use Your Mandate has contacted voters in 7 states as part of what it calls a 7-figure campaign against Hagel. But its roots, some say, are suspect. Gay rights activists have questioned its authenticity, and the New York Times has linked it to Republican ad makers. Meanwhile, Chuck Hagel's supporters have had their hands full trying to push back against the criticism. With me now is somebody who's been trying to push back against this criticism, Steve Clements, Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic. He's also founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. There's a lot of criticism of Chuck Hagel. A lot of it is based on some of the things he has said about Israel and what is considered pro-Israel and not pro-Israel these days in American politics. Do you believe any of this criticism is warranted? Is any of the criticism that has been brought to light made you say, go to Chuck Hagel and say, can you explain this?
No, I think that the only legitimate criticism out there that I think deserves to be aired publicly are differences in worldview that Chuck Hagel has on some issues, like the issue of, what is America's place in the world today? How should we engage enemies? That's a legitimate conversation that should be had. But the smear stuff, the stuff about gay, to certainly reading Jim Inhofe's op-ed the other day is very interesting. He's basically saying, Chuck Hagel is a meat-eating oil man Republican, and he doesn't want Obama to have that brand in his cabinet so that Obama can use the Republicanism as a way to basically cut the Pentagon and do other things, and to legitimate as bipartisan some of the things Obama wants to do. So there have been lots of sorts of criticisms, and what you see is Chuck Hagel's become a sandbox for a proxy war between whether it's big billionaires like Sheldon Adelson and others, but in my view, the Israel stuff is the worst, because Chuck Hagel has been a strong supporter and defender of Israel for a long time, and it's been very interesting to see this play out.
What do you make, though, of the fact that when the president went over there as candidate, he realized that there was that there were some folks in Israel who didn't view Chuck Hagel as an ally?
Well, I think when I sort of dispute the notion that was there. I think the president, when he went over, separated before I knew about that trip. Jack Reed and Chuck Hagel were both on the trip, and neither Jack Reed nor Chuck Hagel went on the Israel portion of it because they considered that to be more campaign. The other part was we were engaged in a war and a conflict, and they made the separation between what was campaign and what was sort of senatorial information gathering. Now, maybe they made a deeper calculation. They didn't want to have Hagel there in Israel because he was a touch point. That I have doubts about that, but let's just say that we're true. It doesn't matter in the end. I mean, if you are trying, this is a political game, and if the point is, if you didn't want to basically rile up folks one way or the other, Chuck Hagel is someone who is very clearly about not making false choices between one side of America's equation in the Middle East and the other side. And that means hugging Israel closely, but that doesn't mean sticking other allies in the eye.
Well, let's talk about what you brought up, what you think might actually be the root of what this disagreement really is about, which is his worldview.
Right.
What is America's role in the world? Bob Woodward quoted Hagel in a meeting that he had with President Obama back in 2009, where Bob Woodward believes this is where President Obama became intrigued by the idea of bringing Chuck Hagel into his administration. Apparently, Hagel said to him, "We are at a time where there is a new world order. We don't control it. You must question everything, every assumption. Any assumption 10 years old is out of date. You need to question our role." There's no, I could see myself covering the president, how that would animate him. That's somebody, that type of thing. But they do, the president wants to be more engaged sometimes than it looks like Chuck Hagel does.
Well, I would dispute that. I think Chuck Hagel is someone who's thought deeply about what strategy do you need to put in place to achieve a new global social contract between the United States and other key stakeholders. Look, we've been militarily overstretched, economically overstretched. We've done things morally in the world that have raised questions about America's leadership in places like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. And you've got to basically reinvent American power and leverage by striking a new deal with other nations in the world where there's a lot of doubt about where America's going. And so Hagel's been talking about this for years in a very judicious and I would argue a conservative way.
Right.
But nonetheless, Obama and Hagel meet on that because Obama could very well be the transformational figure in global affairs that we all hoped he would be, but doing it in a way that is, I would argue, Nixonian. And so I wrote a piece once saying Obama needs to find his inner Nixon by bringing Hagel into his cabinet. He finally has done it.
What you just described with Hagel would be sort of what the old conservative Republican foreign policy ideology used to be.
That's right.
Conservative Republican.
This is Richard Nixon.
Which was?
Or Eisenhower. Take Nixon or Eisenhower, which either side of the
Something
line.
it would be a more interesting conversation, but my clock is ticking.
Great.
Mr. Clemens,
Thank
always
you,
a
Chuck.
pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.